What's up, fellas? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Steve and this is Tech Teardown. Today in this video I'm going to be revisiting the Ryzen 3 3200G APU. It's a question I see asked a lot of times on the internet, whether it be to one of my fellow peers on YouTube or through threads on Reddit, etc., asking what graphics card can I pair with the 3200G without it bottlenecking? And that's the question I'm going to try and answer here in this video. I have several graphics cards down here that I've tested, and I'm going to try and find that answer out here for you. There are some graphics cards that I don't have on hand that I wish I could have tested, and those are including the GTX 1660 and the GTX 1660 Ti. And obviously I would have liked to see something like an RTX 2060 and RX 5700 as well, and see how those are pairing with this system. For this test system here, I obviously have the 3200G as our processor. I also have Team Group's Delta RGB, 16 gigabytes of RAM at 3200 megahertz speed, CL16 cast latency. For the graphics cards I have tested, for our low end, I have our RX 560, which if you haven't seen my previous videos, I really think that is the low end budget king. Way better than the 1050 Ti and the GTX 1050. I can't recommend the RX 560 enough compared to that card. I got mine for $50 on eBay, and the 1050 Ti's are still going for like $100 and up, which is absolutely ridiculous for what you get with that graphics card. So RX 560 all day over the GTX 1050 Ti. Can't recommend it enough. Moving up from there, also on the AMD side, I have the RX 570 4GB model. The version I am running is the Asus Strix version. And then moving on up from there, also on the AMD side, I have an XFX RX 590 Fat Boy, which I actually picked up just for this video, which is probably why you're seeing the plastic wrap still on it. Now for the NVIDIA side, the low end here, I have our GTX 1060 3GB. And I wish I had a GTX 1060 6GB also to test, but I do know a friend of mine has the GTX 1060 6GB paired with a 2200G, and they did not see any bottlenecking, so a GTX 1060 6GB would be a great option for you guys. Now moving up from the 1060, I do have a GTX 1070. This is the Founders Edition I got from EVGA. Moving on up from the GTX 1070, I have the GTX 1080. This is my brother's graphics card. You might remember I had a video way back a few months ago where I taught my brother how to build a computer. That video is right here. He's letting me borrow his EVGA GTX 1080 Superclocked Edition in order to do my testing with the GTX 1080, and I do have some examples of me using the GTX 1080 to show some bottlenecking, because spoiler alert, the 3200G bottlenecks the GTX 1080 in a lot of titles. Hey guys, Editing Steve here. As I'm editing this video, I'm starting to notice that I don't do a great job in explaining what a bottleneck is. If you already know what a bottleneck is and just want to see the results, follow the timestamp right here. Now, a bottleneck, there can be a bottleneck where the CPU is bottlenecking the GPU or the GPU is bottlenecking the CPU. For this particular video, we're going to focus on where the CPU could be bottlenecking the GPU. Now, some games, the GPU is going to be waiting on the CPU to do its job before it can perform its job. You'll probably see that in a clip later in the future where I show an example of a bottleneck in the game Shadow of the Tomb Raider when I'm using the GTX 1080. One thing I do a poor job of explaining is that you could always have a bottleneck. You could have a 9900K and a 2080 Ti, and something is going to be bottlenecked somewhere in that system. There's no way to have the perfectly balanced system. So what we're trying to do here in this video is just try to show you where do the performance gains stop and what is the best price performance that you can get with this budget CPU, the 3200G. Again, in this video, we are looking at how the 3200G is potentially slowing down the performance of the graphics card it's paired with. And most of that has to do with the graphics card in testing is waiting for the 3200G to perform its job so the GPU can begin its job. Things I've looked at during this testing is how often the CPU was being used to its fullest, pinged at 100%, and the GPU was only being used 50%. In a lot of instances, I've seen the GPU drop down even lower than that in a lot of GPU-intensive games. So looking at GPU utilization is one way to spot a bottleneck, not the most effective way, as there are some games where some scenes might just not need the GPU or need to use it to its fullest. There's times in Shadow of the Tomb Raider where that is evident. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and put it back up top. If you have any other questions about bottlenecking, let me know down in the comments. Now, some things I want to mention about my testing methodology, specifically for GTA 5, which is one of the titles I want you to focus on when you're looking at the charts, because it was a great example of bottlenecking that you'll be able to see. In GTA 5, I had a lot of just weird things popping up where like RX 570 performing better than the RX 590, which is definitely, I mean, it can happen when you're seeing bottlenecking, but the difference was not within a 1% margin of error or anything like that. It was a huge leap, and I was running the GTA 5 benchmark, the full benchmark, in order to get these tests when I first started. I've retested every single card at least 5 different times in multiple games because I was seeing so many weird results that I wanted to retest, make sure I was running the same graphic settings on all games and all graphics cards, make sure I'm getting you accurate results. So there's so many weird things that I saw when testing this that I did go back and test each graphics card at least 5 times in all of the titles. So to eliminate a lot of the issues I was having with GTA 5, I only benchmarked one part of the built-in benchmark, which is the part at the end of the benchmark where they're driving their car through the city, crashing into cars, and then eventually crashing into a gas tank and exploding. Now, I felt that this part of the benchmark was the most representative of what it is like to actually play in the game of GTA 5. A lot of the issues I was having with the GTA 5 built-in benchmark is if you test it and base it off of the entire benchmark itself, it has to load every scene, and when I'm benchmarking it with MSI Afterburner, it's getting in that 170 or 180 FPS when it's black screen, loading up the next scene in the benchmark. So I picked one that didn't have to load, and one that was most representative of actual in-game performance with these graphics cards. So that is what I'm doing here, and I'm showing you guys here on the screen what part of the benchmark I am doing. Other games that you should take note of when you're looking at these benchmark results on the graphs is Hitman 2, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, as well as CSGO. These games are the ones that showed the biggest bottleneck of them all. The other games I was actually able to see a performance boost between each graphics cards once we went up. And when you're looking at my benchmark results at each graphics card, take a note at where the performance increase starts to level off as you increase the level of graphics card performance, i.e. GTX 1070, GTX 1080, and RX 570, RX 590. Once you see where there is no performance increase, that is where you can see a bottleneck. So I figured performance scaling is the best way to show you guys a bottleneck and which is the best graphics card to pair with this 3200G. So without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and roll those benchmarks. I'll give them a little bit longer on the screen for you guys to take a look at and see which graphics card is gonna be the best to pair with the games that you play. So here we go, here are the benchmarks. Once those are done rolling, I'll come back on top and finish up my thoughts. All right, guys, as you can see, those benchmarks are in, and there are times where the GTX 1080 is giving you a big performance boost over the GTX 1070 in games like Rainbow Six Siege and things like that nature. Fortnite is one of those where you see a performance boost, but a GTX 1080 is definitely one that I'm not going to recommend to pair with this 3200G because it definitely does bottleneck, and as games become newer and things of that nature, the GTX 1080 is going to be starting to get bottlenecked because games are becoming more and more CPU bound. GTX 1070 is even being bottlenecked in a lot of the games, but also in those games like Fortnite and Rainbow Six Siege, it did offer a performance boost over the GTX 1060 and RX 590. The RX 590 definitely offered some bottlenecking in games like Grand Theft Auto 5 compared to the RX 570, but RX 590 had such a little bottleneck that I would feel comfortable saying that you would be safe to go ahead and pair an RX 590 with a 3200G, but I would save some money and probably go RX 580 and RX 570 or GTX 1066 gigabyte over that, definitely if you go on the used market. For people who are budget conscious and went with the 3200G because they are more focused on a budget, the RX 560 is a fantastic option, and I really do just love that graphics card. I think it's one of the best value graphics cards out there on the used market. As I said, I got mine for $50. My friend Coalition Gaming, he got his RX 560 for $25. And there's just great deals to be had on eBay when you're looking for a used graphics card. RX 560 is a great value. RX 570 obviously is one of those cards that are always going to be great values on the used market, including eBay, and same with RX 580s. GTX 1060s I think are they're hard to come by. I got mine for $75, and that's an excellent value. So if you can get a GTX 1060 for around the price that I paid, I would say that is an excellent pairing. GTX 1070, there are quite a few bottlenecks to be seen, but there are also some performance gains in there as well. So the GTX 1070, you wouldn't be losing too much performance if you were to pair one with it, but I'm not going to go ahead and recommend that you pair a GTX 1070 with the 3200G. If I was building this system for myself and trying to stay on a budget, the graphics card I would pick to go with the 3200G is the RX 570. This is such a great value graphics card nowadays. I can't recommend it enough, and I think this is a great pairing with the Ryzen 3 3200G. I think this is a great overall price to performance graphics card that you can't beat. That's with any system that you build, but right now this is the graphics card I'm going to recommend based off of the cards that we have here in this lineup. GTX 1660 is one I really wish I could have tested because I think that could have been one that I would recommend, but it's hard to say right now. If I get my hands on a GTX 1660 and you guys want me to test that, let me know down in the comments because I'd love to answer that question for you guys as well. Now, to show you guys some examples of bottlenecking that I was seeing in here, I'm going to skip ahead to when I was testing the GTX 1080 in Shadow of the Tomb Raider and show you guys what that bottleneck was looking like, and I'll come back on and discuss another thing that happened with Hitman 2. Alright, what's up guys? I have my GTX 1080 in here with the 3200G, and I'll give you an example of what a bottleneck looks like. And I am in Shadow of the Tomb Raider right now. If any of my charts didn't really show a bottleneck as well as you'd like to see, I think this will definitely show it to you. Now, with the settings I'm using, these are the same settings I've used across every other graphics card I've tested in this video. I have DirectX 12 turned on with 1920 by 1080 and TAA anti-aliasing, and then ultra settings, shadow quality is on high, ambient occlusion, everything is pretty much high, motion blur turned off. So I'm going to go ahead and run the benchmark, and we'll see how the what a bottleneck looks like. All right, so here we are in the Shadow of the Tomb Raider benchmark. What I want to show you is further down the line, but surprisingly, despite the huge bottleneck that this game is getting, I did see some performance gain during my benchmark, which was very surprising. You can see here that we're not using all of the GPU. That could be just a fact of the games not needing to use the graphics card as much, because you can see the CPU is not at 100% just yet, very close. There are times where it does get pinged at 100% as of right there. All right, so you can see it's taking a long time to load this next scene here in the benchmark. But keep your eyes, if you've run the Shadow of the Tomb Raider benchmark, as I've done several times, you'll see that there's something missing for the next like 30 seconds in this next scene whenever it does actually load. And it keeps trying to load the scene. All right, so in this benchmark, there are supposed to be mountains, just mountains everywhere. And they're going to pop in here probably in the next 10 seconds. So like 10, 9, oh, there they go. So, and you can see it's 100% pinged on the CPU, and the GPU is only being used at 50%. And I think that's because it wasn't rendering those mountains, I believe, and it was getting very high FPS in the 120s, 130s. I think that is why that we were seeing a bit of a performance boost. And I did see this on the GTX 1070. It didn't take this long to load those mountains. So it was bottlenecking the GTX 1070 a little bit in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Most other games didn't see that big of a bottleneck. But here with this GTX 1080, see again, pinged at 100% and only being used about 59 to 60% of the GPU. So definitely a bottleneck here with the GTX 1080. In Shadow of the Tomb Raider, some games we did see quite a bit of a performance boost, and wasn't being bottlenecked as heavily as you can see in this game, as well as in Hitman 2. All right, guys, as you can see, Shadow of the Tomb Raider is a great example of a GPU bottleneck, as it uses a lot of the processor as well as the graphics card. And the GTX 1080 was astronomical in its bottleneck, where it took several seconds to load in those mountains. I saw it with the GTX 1070, took about just as long as the GTX 1080 to load in those mountains. It happened to me with the RX 590, but RX 590, it took like 2 seconds to, and then the mountains popped into the screen. So there was a bottleneck there with RX 590 as well, but not as big as one as the GTX 1070 or GTX 1080. That's why I'm safely, I feel safe enough to recommend an RX 590, but like I said, I still would prefer you go with an RX 570 or an RX 580 or GTX 1060 6 gig. Another example that I have for you is with Hitman 2. I don't have it on video though, because I do want to keep this at a reasonable length of a video for you, and that is the Hitman 2 benchmark. I noticed that if I were to switch it to 1440p and run the same benchmark at the same test, got the exact same performance if I was running on 1920 by 1080. Some of these, if you are planning on running a 1440p monitor, RX 590, GTX 1070 might be okay enough options for you if you want to run 1440p, where it's going to force that graphics card to be used more, and in some cases even net better performance than 1920 by 1080, as the graphics card actually gets to stretch its legs in those moments. And one of the reasons for that is 1920 by 1080 just hits the CPU a little bit harder, and the graphics card doesn't has to wait more on the CPU to load, where when you're running a higher resolution, the graphics card is working much harder and has to be used more often. And at the higher resolution, the graphics card is just going to keep on moving. So that's one thing to consider when you're thinking about pairing a graphics card with the 3200G. But still, I think when you're paying $100 for a processor like the 3200G, I can't see there's many people out there that are going to be wanting to pair a graphics card like a GTX 1070, GTX 1080 with such a low-end processor. Alright guys, I think that is all I have to say about this 3200G. It is an excellent value processor that I can't recommend enough. As always, if you have any questions, let me know down in the comments. I'll be more than happy to help you. That is what I'm here for on YouTube, is to help you out and answer any questions that you have. So feel free. I'm always down in the comments, checking my comments, trying to help anybody out that needs it. And if you've made it through this video, I can't thank you enough for watching and being a part of my community. If you are new here, it would be great if you could like the video and subscribe. Hit the bell if you want YouTube to notify you of my future videos. If you didn't like the video, that's fine. Just let me know down in the comments what you thought I did wrong, and I will try to address that in the future. Thanks again for watching, guys, and I will see you guys in the next video.